So today was a pretty big day. Today is a day that the Supreme Court is going to decide, well, not today, but in the coming few weeks, it's going to decide if my husband and I have the right to marriage. And I stress my husband and I. Now, this case has been boiling up and over for the last 20 to 30 years, with people originally in New York protesting and blocking their state legislation, and in DC doing the same thing, upholding pretty much their legislation by crowding their offices demanding a marriage license. Now, this wasn't for show back then. This wasn't trying to push, our notion. These were true people who really were together for years, decades, and wanted to get married. And it's taken this long. It's taken almost 40 years for this case to truly happen. And honestly, I think it might take even longer for us to have our rights. So, what happened today was a lot of things, but more or less, the justices kept bringing up appeals to tradition. And the worst part was that the plaintiff, or our defense, was not addressing those logical fallacies when they came about and not tearing them apart one by one. They kept bringing up how marriage has been around for millennia as between a man and a woman. And I wish I was there, because I would have said, but they said the same thing about slavery. It was around for millennia. The ancient Egyptians supposedly did this in the Bible, even though there's no really history of that. But they still did that. They still did this, and slavery was around for blah, 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 blah. And that's the thing that really upsets me, is these appeals to tradition. I can't say that right now. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm tired. But these appeals to tradition always aggravate me the most. They're the most hollow logical fallacy. You're pointing at something and saying, look, it's been done that way for decades, therefore your argument's invalid. Well, just because something's been done that way for X amount of time doesn't mean it's been right. I mean, you can be dancing a certain way for this period of time. It doesn't make it right. And here's the thing, is popularity and tradition are the two most shallow things ever. And that was their argument against gay marriage. The questions the court asked always centered around tradition. Here's an example, and I'm going to use power tools for this. So all those out there who like power tools, you'll like this. I like power tools because they get the job done faster. Picture this: the hammer and the nail. Now, it wasn't always called a hammer, but that idea or style of fastening things together like wood has been around longer than millennia. It's been around longer it's been around for millennias, tens of millennias, if not probably longer. It could have started off as just a splinter of wood being hammered through a softer piece of wood by a rock, but that concept was still there. And now today we look at it, and the hammer is much more refined. It's got a tuning fork-like system in it to reduce vibration, and it works wonderfully. And it's a great, great tool for fastening things together or sticking something in something else. For instance, I can take a piece of wood, take a nail that's been precisely made, stick it in the wood, stick the two pieces together, and give it 2 smacks, and it's in. That's amazing, isn't it? Instead of taking a rock and bashing on top of it for hours maybe, or having to do it specifically in a specific, precise way. Now, if we wanted to use an appeal to tradition, we would say that's the only way to hammer in a nail. But that's wrong. We have other ways to put a nail in a piece of wood or anywhere. It's called a compressor with tubes and a belt with many small little wedges on it. You take that little thing, you push it up against your object, you press a button, it goes ka-chunk, and it's now fastened with no effort whatsoever. The nail gun. The nail gun is an advancement of technology. And guess what? Most carpenters use it because it's quick. It does the job just as effectively, and it doesn't take energy away from them so they can use energy elsewhere. My basic and favorite argument against the appeal of tradition is technology, because technology never thinks and says, maybe we should do it like we did back then when everything was ineffective, inefficient, and took so much effort. We try consistently to make things easier, to take away the effort so that we can do more, faster, better, stronger, engineering. These have always been the hallmarks of technology. And the thing that aggravates me so much is that we do not use that same mindset towards equality for any minority, not just us gay people. And it's very frustrating because we have so many people who are just completely left out, my husband and I included, because we've been doing marriage this way for millennia. Really? Millennia? That argument has been used over and over again. And just looking at the appeal to tradition from that argument, let's look at the argument in Lovings versus Virginia. They used the appeal to tradition and millennia to say that blacks and whites shouldn't be able to marry. That it was always white people, and that was it. And recently we allowed black people to marry each other and give them those rights. But it is unbelievable and ungodly, again, tradition, God is a tradition, to allow the couples, the races to mix. And guess what happened to that argument? It died. Completely died. And that's the same issue here. But the thing is that the Supreme Court didn't look at the appeal to tradition as strongly as it seems like it's doing now. And in that case of tradition, there's something else that got brought up that almost made my heart sink. And I'll read it to you right now. Let me pull it up. This is from our liberal justices. And I really put in the term brackets liberal because I don't believe in those kind of dualities of liberal and conservative because it depends on the issue, especially if it affects you. So this is what Sotomayor said. She said, "I'm sorry. Nobody is taking away from anybody. Every single individual in this society chooses, if they can, their sexual orientation or who to marry or not to marry. Period. I suspect even with us giving gays the right to marry, there is some gay people who will choose not to, just as there's some heterosexual couples who choose not to. So we're not taking away anyone's liberty." Now, this is response to Michigan and Ohio's lawyers arguing that it will substantially burden married couples or couples who will eventually marry because gay people can marry. This argument is so fallacious, it's ridiculous. But in the same point, let me just reread this. Every single individual in this society chooses, if they can, their sexual orientation. That statement shouldn't even be there. That statement is completely felonious, if there's such a word. But it's completely inaccurate. And I know if they can could be like a marker. But the object there is that gay people still choose their sexual orientation, throwing science, decades of science away. And oh, by the way, the court basically said about all the science that's been there about gay people is, well, I didn't say it, but they made it feel like all the science that's there that show gay couples raising kids and gay couples being people and we're born this way is superfluous because it's so new. Again, the Supreme Court rides on the coattails of science, right? No. Again, science has to take a huge backseat in this country's court system because, what does scientists know? They only study people for their entire lives. They only study societies for their entire life. They only know how everything works. Probably better than the justices could ever even hope to know. But again, the whole thing there about that we choose our sexual orientation, in society chooses sexual orientation or who to marry, that is all an appeal to tradition. Because it is tradition that tells us that gay people are brought about by bad things and they choose to be that way, or they were pushed to being that way, but they're naturally straight, which is completely wrong. And so here's the thing about looking at tradition. Maybe we should start looking at having a 3-tier justice system, or a 3-tier system, as maybe also a fallacy of tradition. For instance, how often have we seen now the justice system fail people? Looking at the shootings by cops or the brutalities by cops against African Americans or even gay people. I remember growing up in the streets of Detroit and fearing for my life, not from the thugs, but from the cops. Okay? Because I was gay. And when I was homeless for those 6 weeks of my life, I feared immensely the police more than anyone else. Because they openly harassed and hurt gay people. Now this is back, way back, in the early 2000s. And people can argue a lot have changed since then, but the reality is, has it? For instance, let's look at our justice system. If it's so blind, then why is it so easily allows people who kill other people for no reason, who have power, to get away with it? Why is it that corporations have more religious and civil rights than people do, where people don't have those rights? Why is it that with our amazing justice system, can a gay person defend himself from being attacked by 5 to 12 people and then go to jail for assault when he was nearly killed? Or a transgender person go to jail for 3 years for defending herself from an attack, while the attacker pretty much doesn't even get a slap on the wrist. I know that if someone were to attack my husband or I and succeed in extinguishing our lives, that most likely that nothing would happen to them unless we were some high-profile person, and that likelihood of something happening to them would decrease dramatically if one of us was African American or Hispanic or Chinese or anything like that, of a different race. Or we both were. Or we were both immigrants, or one of us was an immigrant. The chances of us receiving justice extinguish almost entirely. And so, how can we say our justice system is good? I would actually argue against it, saying that our justice system is antiquated to the point where it's no longer good. It's bad. It's horrible. It's almost teetering on the point of evil because of how much atrocities we allow happen to minorities. Sure, if you make a lot of money and you're white, you're perfectly fine. The justice system works just fine for you. The cops do your job, you nod your head, and you go on your day and everything's perfect. But what about the people who don't have that ability? What about the people who are just trying to scrape by? Who can't afford to live in the nice neighborhoods? What about those people? Oh, that's right. They don't exist, even though they make up 90% of the wealth this country foists upon other countries in their face. And the justice system doesn't represent us at all. Jury of your peers? That's a good one. That's a real good one. So I'm going to make the argument that believing in our justice system is an appeal to tradition, and therefore it's a logical fallacy. That's my argument. And I believe that if corporations are giving all this power to have amazing, almost like we're back in the royal societies kind of power with monarchs, where you can't equal that kind of power. You have to be born into it. If that's going to be the case, maybe our whole entire justice system, our 3-tier form of government, is completely antiquated and wrong. Now, I'm not saying that we should bow our heads to the corporations as they're the almighty good gods. No, some of them are horrible and getting worse. But then again, that's another appeal to tradition itself. Maybe corporations are starting to wake up and starting to see the evil they do and change. And they seem to be on a case trying to fight more for the minorities than any single politician I've ever seen done. Some could say it's a face value to make more money, and they're more or less could be completely right. But I see corporations doing more good than our government is. Would we have gay rights right now if it wasn't for corporation backing? Hell no. Because corporations own our politicians. And it's really scary. And so one would say maybe our government is no longer good anymore. And maybe it needs to be remade. You see, democracies don't last very long. 300 to 400 years is usually how long they last, according to history, and we're nearing that 300 mark. So what do we do? Well, we don't know. I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that question. What do we do in this kind of situation? But I will say that our justice system is failing at every single turn. And maybe it's time we need to step back and think. Is this the America we were told to believe in? Because I don't think it is. I don't think it's America at all. I think it's fascism. I think it's terrible. We wave our little American flags around screaming, America, America, fuck yeah. You know, America's so great. But is it? Why? How are we great? We're not. We're below average. Why? Because we allow these appeals to tradition control us. And that's just one logical fallacy. There's thousands we could go on. Either way, I'm Nishoba Fennec here. Have a good night.